Hello， 大家好。
大家好。
今日我哋咧就繼續呢個讀你聽嚇，我哋讀咩書啊？
讀遠大前程。
係啊，邊個寫㗎？
唔知咩學唔記得咗喎。
Charles Dickens 啊，連讀咗咁耐作者名都唔知。好啦，咁我哋而家讀到咧呢個故事嘅第二階段㗎啦。咁第二階段咧已經開始咗啦。咁呢個階段係咩咧？就係阿 Pip 到倫敦啦，開展佢嘅進入上流啦。咁進入上流咧就需要一個人嘅幫助啊。
lawyer 啦。呢
個人咧就係佢嘅監護人啦。咁啊本身嘅職業咧就係 lawyer 嚟嘅。咁咧就係 Mr. Jaggers 啊。咁啊上一回咧就講到 Mr. Jaggers 佢個 office 啦。咁啊同埋幫佢打工嗰啲秘書啊、啲文員啊咁啦。同埋就係講即係嚟揾 Mr. Jaggers 俾生意去做嘅呢啲平民百姓佢哋嘅苦況啦。Jaggers 對佢哋嘅威逼啦。同埋即係倫敦嗰個風景啊，嗰啲街道啊、畫面啊，其實並唔係即係阿 Pip 想像到咁美好啦。可能農村生活仲即係接近大自然，仲會清新啲。咁倫敦係比較邋遢。咁呢個喺 Victorian 嗰個年代嘅倫敦絕對係咁啦。即係好多窄巷啊，好多霧啊，好污糟啊。咁你會問點解咧？點解倫敦咁污糟咧？就係因為即係英國嘅工業革命發展得比較早啊。即係由水蒸氣年代啊，一路發展到用一啲煤啊資源啊，咁啊成立嗰啲輕工廠啊，咁啊不停有好多工人階級咯，去工廠做嘢咯，咁啊有工廠就會有咩啊？會有污水咯，污染嘅空氣咯，煙咯，係咪啊？咁啊就係咁樣嘅年代啦嘅英國啦。你想像我哋睇 Monet 嗰啲畫咧，即係佢就係生活喺呢個年代，就係工業革命啱啱起步咗啦，咁啊可以起到火車啊、起到火車軌啊、橋啊啲大型嘅工程，咁佢咪好中意畫呢啲嘢，係咪？OK， 咁咧我哋睇下呢個第21回，好嘛？
好。
咁你可以跟住睇啦，係啊。佢話 Casting my eyes on Mr. Wemmick as he went along to see what he was like in the light of day。Mr. Wemmick 係邊個啊？知唔知啊？
唔知啊。基
本上就係Mr. Jaggers 嘅 clerk 啦，你可以話佢係佢嘅秘書啦。唔係手下啦，佢哋唔係幫會，唔係叫手下。你可以話佢係佢秘書咯。你可以話佢係佢嗰啲幫佢寫文書人咯，係咪？幫佢接客啊咁咯。咁 Wemmick 都係有名有姓嘅，咁即係咩意思？即係話喺眾多秘書之中 ，Mr. Wemmick 都係首席啦，比較重要啲嘅啦。但係除咗 Wemmick 仲有其他嘅 ，OK。但係主要係 Mr. Wemmick。I found him to be a dry man, rather short in stature, with a square wooden face, whose expression seemed to have been imperfectly chipped out with a dull-edged chisel. There were some marks in it that might have been dimples, if the material had been softer and the instrument finer, but which, as it was, were only dints. The chisel had made 3 or 4 of these attempts at embellishment over his nose, but had given them up without an effort to smooth them off. 即係其實呢個就係用一個工匠嘅語氣去形容呢個 Mr. Wemmick 嘅外表啦。咁 Mr. Wemmick 嘅外表係點咧？就係 square wooden face 咯。你主要俾佢印象係咁，就仲係好 dry 咯，即係唔係嗰啲好會即係啲不苟言笑嘅人咯，係咪啊？I judged him to be a bachelor from the frayed condition of his linen.And he appeared to have sustained a good many bereavements, for he wore at least 4 mourning rings, besides a brooch representing a lady and a weeping willow at a tomb with an urn on it. I noticed too that several rings and seals hung at his watch chain, as if he were quite laden with remembrance of departed friends. He had glittering eyes, small, keen and black, and thin, white, mottled lips. He had had them, to the best of my belief, from 40 to 50 years. 即係其實意思最尾一句即係咩意思啊？即係話佢大估佢40零歲咯，同埋即係佢覺得佢係一個 bachelor 咯，同埋即係有可能係一個 widower 咯。So, you were never in London before, said Mr. Wemmick to me. No, said I. I was new here once, said Mr. Wemmick. Rum to think of now. You are well acquainted with it now. Why, yes, said Mr. Wemmick. I know the moves of it. Is it a very wicked place? I asked, more for the sake of saying something than for information. You may get cheated, robbed, and murdered in London, but there are plenty of people anywhere who'll do that for you. If there is bad blood between you and them, said I, to soften it off a little. Oh, I don't know about bad blood, returned Mr. Wemmick. There's not much bad blood about. They'll do it if there's anything to be got by it. That makes it worse. You think so? Returned Mr. Wemmick. Much about the same, I should say. He wore his hat on the back of his head and looked straight before him, walking in a self-contained way as if there were nothing in the streets to claim his attention. His mouth was such a post office of a mouth that he had a mechanical appearance of smiling. We had got to the top of Holborn Hill before I knew that it was merely a mechanical appearance and that he was not smiling at all. Do you know where Mr. Matthew Pocket lives? I asked Mr. Wemmick. Yes, said he, nodding in a direction. At Hammersmith, west of London. Is that far? Well, say 5 miles. Do you know him? Why, you're a regular cross-examiner, said Mr. Wemmick, looking at me with an approving air. Yes, I know him. I know him. There was an air of toleration or depreciation about his utterance of these words that rather depressed me, and I was still looking sideways at his block of a face in search of any encouraging note to the text, when he said, here we were at Bernard's Inn. My depression was not alleviated by the announcement, for I had supposed that establishment to be an hotel kept by Mr. Bernard, to which the Blue Boar in our town was a mere public house, whereas I now found Bernard to be a disembodied spirit, or a fiction, and is in the dingiest collection of shabby buildings ever squeezed together in a rank corner as a club for tomcats. 咁其實即係話咩？即係話呢個 Mr. Bernard 呢個 establishment 好渣好入啦，連一個農村出嚟嘅小朋友都會咁話佢，即係好差。We entered this haven through a wicket gate, and were disgorged by introductory passage into a melancholy little square that looked to me like a flat burying ground. I thought it had the most dismal trees in it, and the most dismal sparrows, and the most dismal cats, and the most dismal houses that I had ever seen. I thought the windows of the sets of chambers into which those houses were divided were in every stage of dilapidated blind and curtain, crippled flower pot, cracked glass, dusty decay, and miserable makeshift, while to let glared at me from empty rooms, 即係冇人租啦, as if no new wretches ever came there, and the vengeance of the soul of Bernard were being slowly appeased by the gradual suicide of the present occupants and their unholy interment under the gravel. A frowsy morning of soot and smoke attired this forlorn creation of Bernard, and he had strewn ashes on his head, and was undergoing penance and humiliation as a mere dust hole. Thus far my sense of sight, while dry rot and wet rot, and all the silent rots that rot in the neglected roof and cellar, rot of rat and mouse and bug and coaching stables near at hand besides, addressed themselves faintly to my sense of smell, and moaned, try Bernard's mixture. So imperfect was this realization of the first of my great expectations, that I looked in dismay at Mr. Wemmick. Ah, said he, mistakenly, the retirement reminds you of the country. So it does me. He led me into a corner and conducted me up a flight of stairs which appeared to me to be slowly collapsing into sawdust, so that one of those days the upper lodgers would look out at their doors and find themselves without the means of coming down to a set of chambers on the top floor. Mr. Pocket, Jun, was painted on the door, and there was a label on the letterbox, returned shortly. He hardly thought you'd come so soon, Mr. Wemmick explained. You don't want me any more? No, thank you, said I. As I keep the cash, Mr. Wemmick observed, we shall most likely meet pretty often. Good day. Good day. I put out my hand and Mr. Wemmick at first looked at it as if he thought I wanted something. Then he looked at me and said, correcting himself, to be sure, yes, you're in the habit of shaking hands. I was rather confused, thinking it must be out of the London fashion, but I said yes. I have got so out of it, Mr. Wemmick, except at last. Very glad, I'm sure, to make your acquaintance. Good day. When we had shaken hands and he was gone, I opened the staircase window and had nearly beheaded myself for the lines had rotted away, and it came down like the guillotine. Happily, it was so quick that I had not put my head out. After this escape, I was content to take a foggy view of the inn through the windows encrusting dirt, and to stand dolefully looking out, saying to myself that London was decidedly overrated. Mr. Pocket, Jr.'s idea of shortly was not mine, for I had nearly maddened myself with looking out for half an hour, and had written my name with my finger several times in the dirt of every pane in the window. Before I heard footsteps on the stairs, gradually there arose before me that hat, head, neckcloth, waistcoat, trousers, boots of a member of society of about my own standing. He had a paper bag under each arm and a pottle of strawberries in one hand, and was out of breath. Mr. Pip, said he. Mr. Pocket, said I. Dear me, he exclaimed. I am extremely sorry, but I knew there was a coach from your part of the country at midday, and I thought you would come by at that one. The fact is, I've been out on your account. Not that that is any excuse, for I thought, coming from the country, you might like a little fruit after dinner, and I went to Covent Garden Market to get it good. For a reason that I had, I felt as if my eyes would start out of my head. I acknowledged his attention incoherently, and began to think this was a dream. Dear me, said Mr. Pocket, Jr., this door sticks so. As he was fast making jam of his fruit by wrestling with the door while the paper bags were still under his arms, I begged him to allow me to hold them. He relinquished them with an agreeable smile and combated with the door as if it were a wild beast. It yielded so suddenly at last that he staggered back upon me, and I staggered back upon the opposite door, and we both laughed. But still I felt as if my eyes must start out of my head, and as if this must be a dream. 即係對呢個人個第一個印象都幾好喎，即係好 comedic 咁啦。Pray come in, said Mr. Pocket Jr. Allow me to lead the way. I'm rather bare here, but I hope you'll be able to make out tolerably well till Monday. My father thought you would get on more agreeably through tomorrow with me than with him, and might like to take a walk about London. I'm sure I shall be very happy to show London to you. As to our table, you won't find that bad, I hope, for it will be supplied from our coffee house here, and at your expense, such being Mr. Jagger's directions. As to our lodging, it's not by any means splendid, because I have my own bread to earn, and my father hasn't anything to give me, and I shouldn't be willing to take it if he had. This is our sitting room, just such chairs and tables and carpet and so forth, you see, as they could spare from home. You mustn't give me credit for a tablecloth and spoons and casters, because they come for you from the coffee house. This is my little bedroom, rather musty, but Bernard's is musty. This is your bedroom. The furniture is hired for the occasion, but I trust it will answer the alone together. But we shan't fight, I dare say. But dear me, I beg your pardon, you're holding the fruit all this time. Pray let me take these bags from you. I'm quite ashamed. As I stood opposite to Mr. Pocket Jr., delivering him the bags, 1, 2, I saw the starting appearance come into his own eyes that I knew to be in mine, and he said, falling back, Lord bless me, you're the prowling boy. And you, said I, are the pale young gentleman. 記得當日打咗佢仲啱啱講話我哋唔會打交添，然後佢哋已經打咗啦。呢個僆仔重遇啦，幾好喎！呢個鋪排，我都冇諗到原來佢就係嗰個當日打嗰個，原來佢喺呢個情況之下重遇。咁其實成節好短，今節好短，咁但係其實佢主要係想講咩？佢花好大嘅篇幅喺度講咩？就係呢個 Bernard， 即係佢而家落腳嘅地方係點啊？核突咯！直情係污糟。 唔可以再差啦。佢講到差到唔可以再差啦。佢農村出嚟嘅，但係佢都話呢度差，咁真係好極度差啦。跟住你會諗咁佢唔係做上流人咩？咁點解會咁啊？因為 Mr. Jaggers 話你喺度落腳先，然之後我再安排你再搬去唔知邊度。咁但係會再搬去邊度咧？暫時係冇探討過呢樣嘢。咁佢喺度落腳到幾時咧？我個人覺得就似乎係好耐啦。即係呢個地方咧，似乎係將一啲你擁咗入去嘅人，然之後你就忘記咗佢啦。咁樣嘅狀態。OK。咁而有一度有趣就係、即係當日阿 Pip 同佢因為 Stella 打交嘅呢個，佢以為上流社會嘅呢個後生仔，原來佢都係住喺呢啲咁嘅地方。咁你就會有一個問，你就會不禁就問呢個問題。咁其實上流嘅人係咪其實都係只不過係住喺呢啲地方？
住喺呢度咩？定係佢講到好似 abandon 咗咁樣嘅個地方？
係啊，因為個地方太差啊嘛。
咁即係佢唔係住喺呢度其實？
唔知咧，佢似係喺度同佢 share 一個房喎，好似係啊，即係以我解讀好似係咯。佢係同佢有少少。佢唔係連道門都 jam 咗咩頭先？係啊。咁即係話可能唔係喺度住咯。唔知佢啦，但係佢似乎係。即係佢似乎佢自己嘅環境都唔係十分好咯，咁但係佢都好有心啦，即係去 Covent Garden 買啲生果俾阿 Pip 啦。咁究竟呢個男仔係咪會同阿 Pip 一齊生活咧？咁呢個下回分解啦。以我嘅解讀就似乎係嘅。OK，咁咯。咁呢個就係開始啦。咁都係一個好 humble 嘅 beginning 啦，絕對可以咁講啦。因為佢住嘅環境其實分分鐘仲差過佢以前，因為佢以前雖然唔係話好好，但係起碼都地方夠大啊，但係而家係好細、好壓迫、好擠擁嘅一間房，仲要係啲門又爛，嗰啲天花有霉，嗰啲空氣又係有臭味嘅，食嘢又冇得食，即係唔係農村生活咁，你隨時都有啲好天然嘅嘢食啊嘛。呢度係你係要去 market 買噶嘛，咁雖然佢係有錢，係咁咯，咁啊睇下嚟緊。呢個 Pale Gentleman 會呢個 Mr. Pocket Junior 會帶佢去倫敦睇啲咩見識啲咩啦，好冇？好，我哋下回繼續講啊。OK，拜拜。